Look at what David says in verse 4. And yes, though I want you to underline this phrase, highlight it, circle it. Though I walk through the deep, sunless valley of the shadow of death. We all know what that valley's like, don't we? We can push pause on the story, and literally I could take a microphone right now and begin to walk around this room. We could start a poll online, or you could start chatting, and we could talk about our valleys. We've all had valleys. That valley of the shadow of death, we feel what that valley's like because we've been there. Maybe it was grieving the loss of someone we love. Maybe it was losing a job or losing a marriage or losing a dream, losing a career. We know the valley. Even though I walk through the valley, it's a great picture David painted, and the reason David could paint the picture, David had been a shepherd. That's what I love about the story. David's riding as a sheep, but David's been a shepherd. In fact, the very first time you find David even mentioned in Scripture, he is a young shepherd out in the field taking care of the sheep when the prophet shows up to anoint a new king of Israel, and they said, he's like, is this all your sons? And he says, well, there's one, and he's out taking care of the sheep because he was a shepherd. Now, what's really interesting about it is there is an area over in Israel where shepherds would walk their sheep many times that's known as the valley of the shadow of death. It's a literal place that's pitched in between two massive areas, and it's a valley that's cut. The only time of day that the sun shines in the valley is high noon. The rest of the day is darkness and shadows. So as David writes this, he's probably writing about some of the valleys he's walked through as a person and the valley that he's walked his sheep through. Listen to what he said. And even though I walk through this valley, I will fear or dread no evil, for you are with me. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. Your rod, it protects. Your staff guides, and they comfort me. The question of the day isn't, are you ever going to go through a valley? That's not the question. The question of the day is, when you do, how do you handle it? I'll never choose a valley. Would you write that down? I'll never choose a valley. It's just not instinctful to want to walk through a tough time, but you're gonna, right? And the reality of life is you're either in a valley, coming out of a valley, or you're gonna be going in one soon. That's the reality of life. So what do I need to know about valleys? Number one, valleys are inevitable. You need to know that. They're inevitable. They have nothing to do with how spiritual or unspiritual you are. Valleys are inevitable. You're going to face valleys. You're going to face them in your marriage. You're going to face them in your finances. You're going to face valleys with stuff that goes on in life. Valleys are inevitable. I think there are times we walk through valleys and we feel like we've done something wrong. It's really interesting in the passage. David said, the Lord is my shepherd. And what did that shepherd do? He walked them through the valley. We love that he walks us beside the quiet waters. We struggle to think that God will walk us through valleys. But valleys are inevitable. Here on earth, you will have many trials and sorrows. Now, the guy that gave us that quote was none other than Jesus. While you're here, you're going to walk through some tough times. How many of you sitting in this room today have walked through a valley before? Raise your hand. How many of y'all have walked through a valley in the last week? How many of you should just keep your hand up the whole time, right? And you're just going, dear Jesus, right? Because valleys are inevitable. They're just part of it. I think we struggle because there's a way we popularize, well, when you begin to walk with Christ, you won't face valleys anymore. No. You'll still face valleys. You'll just face them differently. Valleys are inevitable. Second, valleys are unpredictable. Valleys are unpredictable, meaning they come when you least expect them. In fact, I was thinking back on my journey, just in my career journey. Sometimes my valleys, many times, I'm going to say sometimes, many times my valleys have come right after the highest peak. It's the weirdest thing. That's what sometimes I'm like, I just don't want to have it too good. All right, let's just live in the middle because the higher the peak, sometimes the deeper the valley. Number 3, you got to remember the valleys are temporary. They're temporary. I want you to write a verse down, and it's a great reminder, this too shall pass. You're not going to live in this forever. This valley is not your life. Valleys are temporary. Now, they're temporary if you keep walking. But here's what I've learned and here's what I've watched. I've watched people pitch tents in their valley and decide to stay there a little longer. Valleys are as temporary as I choose for my feet to keep me. Meaning, I got to keep walking. Valleys are temporary. Why do I want you to know they're temporary? Because valleys can make you hopeless. Can y'all agree with that? When you're in a valley, you know you're in a valley, and you can go from being the most positive person in the world to incredibly negative like that. And number 4, here's the biggest part. Valleys are purposeful. Valleys are purposeful. I want you to write a little phrase down. Ready? God is working on me, and God is working in me. And God never wastes a valley. He won't. He won't waste your valley. God is working on me. God is working in me. And God won't waste my valley. Valleys are purposeful. You're not in it by accident. You ended up in it by accident. But God will take even the valleys we create for ourselves. Sometimes we end up in a valley because of a stupid choice we've made. And God even uses that in spite of us. God even works in that in spite of us. And he grows us in our valley.